Welcome back, everyone, to the channel, Elderly Confessions. My mother-in-law brought home my sister-in-law, who is pregnant out of wedlock, demanding I let her live with us and provide her $15 million a month. My husband sat beside me and immediately said one sentence that made them both leave in shame. That afternoon, my husband, Kwok Hung, and I had just returned from meeting a client. We hadn't even had a chance to change out of our work clothes before we saw two figures waiting at our gate. One was my mother-in-law, Mrs. Fuong, and the other was my sister-in-law, Nok Chom. At their feet were two large, bulging suitcases, as if they were planning to move in long-term rather than just visiting. What made me freeze was Chom's stomach. It was bulging under a cream-colored maternity dress, her hands clutching her belly, her face heavily made up, but her eyes were red and full of panic and anger. Not long ago, she was bragging all over social media about becoming a wealthy man's wife, with Kai buying her a house, a car, taking her to fancy restaurants, and living like a queen. Yet today, she stood at my doorstep pulling a suitcase, looking for all the world like someone who had just been slapped hard. Before I could even open my mouth to greet them, my mother-in-law walked straight into the house. She didn't ask where we had been, if we were tired, nor did she care if the homeowners agreed. She dropped her handbag hard on the sofa, looked around, and ordered, "From today, Chom is staying here. You're the sister-in-law, you must take care of her." I stood stunned for a few seconds, and Kwok Hung also froze beside me. I tried to keep my voice calm as I asked, "What do you mean, mother? What happened to Chom?" Mrs. Fuong let out a sigh, her face darkening. What else could have happened? That scumbag Kai dumped her. She's pregnant like this, am I supposed to let her go back to the old house for people to laugh at her? I looked over at Chom. She kept her head down, but it didn't look like she was regretful. The way she clutched her belly looked more like she was holding a shield than truly needing protection. I asked softly, "So, are you bringing her here to stay for a few days, or is there something else?" My mother-in-law immediately replied curtly, "She's staying here until she gives birth." As soon as those words fell, I felt a weight heavy on my chest. Mrs. Fuong continued, her voice growing firmer, "The large room on the second floor is empty, let Tram stay there. She's pregnant, she needs space and fresh air. You'll handle her meals, checkups, and supplements. Also, you will provide her with $15 million each month as a personal allowance." I thought I had misheard. $15 million a month? I asked again, trying not to let my voice tremble with anger. Mrs. Fuong glanced at me. Yes, she has to care for the pregnancy, buy maternity clothes, visit the doctor, and keep her spirits up. Besides, she's already boasted to her relatives. If they find out Kai dumped her, where will this family's face be? Only then did Tram look up, tears in her eyes but her voice sharp and spiteful. "You have a big house and money. What would it cost you to help me a little? Do you want me to take this pregnancy out onto the streets?" I looked at her, feeling both pity for the unborn child and coldness because the adults around it only cared about saving face. My mother-in-law saw my silence and thought I was relenting. She continued, "It's just the two of you. It's such a waste to leave that room empty. Your sister-in-law is pregnant, and you won't let her stay. People will laugh in our faces. As a daughter-in-law, you should think about your husband's family." I turned to look at Kwok Hung, to be honest. In that moment, I was prepared to hear him tell me to endure it just one more time. But this time, he was very different. He set his teacup down on the table. The sound of porcelain hitting the glass tabletop rang out sharply. He looked straight at his mother, his voice low but every word crystal clear. "Mom, this house belongs to my wife and me. It is not a relief station for the mistakes that you and Tram deliberately ignored." The entire living room fell deathly silent. My mother-in-law stood frozen, her lips moving but no words coming out. Tram also jerked her head up, tears still on her cheeks, her eyes filled with astonishment. As for me, for the first time in years as a daughter-in-law, I felt the man beside me was truly my husband, not just a son who only knew how to bow to his mother. And I knew from that very moment, the real storm in my husband's family had just begun. Thinking back later, I finally understood that my husband's words that day didn't just come out of thin air. It wasn't a moment of heat, nor was it because he was incited by me as my mother-in-law keeps thinking. It is the result of many years seeing his wife treated like a piggy bank by his family, taken for granted until they forgot the meaning of gratitude. When I first married into the family, Mrs. Fuong was not at all like she is now. She was sweet and articulate, bragging to everyone that her daughter-in-law Mai was both capable and business savvy. This family is truly blessed to have married her. Those words felt so heartwarming back then. For a woman newly entering marriage like me, Just one gentle word from my mother-in-law was enough to make me want to try harder. I thought simply, if I live kindly, people will treat me kindly in return. Kwok Hung and I were not born wealthy. In our early days of marriage, we rented a small space to start our business. We ran orders during the day and sat checking goods at night. Some nights, even near midnight, we were still packing items for customers. I remember a week of heavy rain when the warehouse leaked, soaking a whole corner of stock. We wiped it down while laughing, though we were on the verge of tears. But we didn't give up, just kept gathering every little bit of profit. After many years, we finally bought our own house, a car for work, and had a little savings. The thing is, when we started doing better, while outsiders were happy for us, his family started scheming 10 steps ahead. I still thought his family was my family, so whenever my mother-in-law had an issue, I would help out. When the kitchen broke, I paid for the repairs. When she complained of joint pain, I bought medicine and supplements. Tram didn't finish her makeup course. She called me and said, "Pay the rest for your sister." Thinking maybe she'd learn a trade, I paid for it too. Back then, I didn't calculate gains or losses, just thought if I could help, I would. But the scary thing about help without boundaries is that it easily turns into an obligation. At first, Mrs. Fuang would say, "Let mom ask a small favor." Later, that phrase vanished, replaced by, "Transfer some money for the kitchen repairs, order a new fridge for me, take care of my debt to the third aunt." I'm really stuck. Her tone was no longer shy but sounded like she was reminding me of a duty that was mine by default. Tram is another story. She wasn't exactly bad from the start, but she is lazy and loves to indulge herself. Seeing me use a nice bag, she asks for it. Seeing me buy a good set of cosmetics, she says hers is looking bad too. Seeing me upgrade my phone for work, she sulks. "Since you have a new phone, why don't you give me your old one?" I don't regret giving, but the more I give, the less she appreciates it. Once I advised her, "Tram, you should learn a proper trade. It's better to be able to support yourself later." She immediately pulled a long face. "You're rich now, so you look down on me for being poor, don't you?" I was choked up. A well-intentioned suggestion was twisted into an insult. That evening, Mrs. Fuang called me to the living room, her face stern, saying she was still young. "As an older sister, you should know how to care for her. It's unsightly for a sister-in-law to be so calculative with her husband's younger sister." I explained that I only wanted a stable future for Tram, but she brushed it off, saying family is family regardless of the future. "If you're better off, you should help her. There's no need to lecture her." Things like this kept happening over and over again. At first, Kwok Hung still urged me to be patient. He said his mother was old and temperamental, and Tram was still immature. I understood he loved his mother and sister, so I didn't want to force him to be caught in the middle. But as time went on, even he started to feel uncomfortable. Mrs. Fuang once called while we were meeting clients, just to tell me to send money for new furniture because the old set was too worn out. It was so embarrassing in front of guests. Kwok Hung hung up and sat in silence for a very long time. That night, I told him something he still remembers to this day. Helping is fine, but without boundaries, one day they will expect us to carry their entire lives. He didn't answer immediately. He just looked at me with tired eyes. After a while, he said quietly, "I know, I just thought family wouldn't go that far." I gave a sad smile. Often, it's precisely because they are family that people find it easy to use blood ties to overstep our boundaries. Since that time, Kwok Hung has quietly changed. He didn't make a scene, but he began to keep clear records of assets, business accounts, and distinguish between company funds and our own personal money. He also told me to keep a clear record of every expense for his family, not to demand repayment, but so no one could call us heartless later. At the time, I just thought he was being careful. I never expected that very caution would later save us from falling into a deep pit. So, when my mother-in-law brought home a pregnant Tram and demanded we let her stay and give her 15 million a month, my husband was no longer the man who would just bow his head to keep the peace. He had watched long enough, endured long enough, and understood clearly enough. If the silence continued, it wouldn't save our family. It would only turn our home into a dumping ground for other people's mistakes. Lam Kai appeared in Nok Tram's life on the very day of a memorial service at my husband's family home. That day, at Fuang Dong's house, relatives were coming and going, with dining tables set up from the inside room all the way to the yard. Kwok Hung and I arrived early to help with chores, not because we were forced to, but because it was a memorial day, after all. As descendants, we should be present to fulfill our duties. Near noon, as everyone was setting the tables, a car pulled up to the gate, and a shiny black vehicle parked right in front of the door. The door opened, and Lam Kai stepped out in a white shirt and crisp trousers, a gleaming watch on his wrist. He wasn't incredibly handsome, but he knew how to stand out. Slicked back hair, strong cologne, and a ready smile, like someone comfortable in a crowd. Tram ran out to greet him, her face beaming as if she had just been crowned. She took his arm and pulled him inside, her voice full of pride. "Mom, Kai is here." Mrs. Fuang was sitting with some aunts, but the moment she saw Kai, she stood up, her face lighting up immediately. Kai bowed very politely and presented his gift with both hands. "Greetings, Mom. Today is the memorial, so I asked to come and offer incense to the ancestors. It's not much of a gift, but please accept it to make me happy." Quote, just that one word, "Mom," seemed to make Mrs. Fuang melt. She smiled until her eyes squinted, playfully scolding him. "Oh my, we barely know each other. Why go to such trouble?" Yet, she took the gift quickly, even showing it to the aunt nearby. Kai had brought a box of bird's nest wrapped in red velvet. The outside was printed in elegant gold, and he even gave Tram a perfume bottle that he claimed was hand-carried from abroad. Tram held the bottle up for a video, beaming with a smile, saying it's hard being spoiled so much by a boyfriend. Standing nearby, I just glanced at the bird's nest box and immediately felt something was off. The packaging looked nice, but the printing was blurry, the labels were crooked, and the barcode looked very strange. Tram's perfume was the same. The design was eye-catching, but the cap was loose, and the scent was harsh rather than subtle like the real thing. I've been in business for years. While I don't specialize in luxury goods, I can tell when something is just all surface. Novices see luxury, but those who've sourced and inspected goods see cheap junk. During the meal, Kai spoke very cleverly. He didn't eat much, just sipped some wine and started talking about his investments. He talked about resort real estate, knowing big players in the industry, and opening a chain of high-end furniture showrooms. Every word he said smelled like money, but strangely, whenever asked about his company's location, paperwork, or completed projects, he would just laugh it off. "Well, business these days involves many sensitive connections, Mr. Hung. There are relationships I can't disclose yet. If I say it too soon, I'll lose my luck." Kwok Hung just gave a faint smile. I understood that smile. People who truly do business properly don't need to be so vague, while those who use connections to hide from specific questions should be approached with caution. My husband asked further, "So, do you have your own corporate legal entity yet?" Kai immediately raised his glass. Mr. Hung really asks like a true businessman. "I do, but we are currently restructuring. I'll send you my proper business card in a few days." That answer sounded smooth, but the smoother it sounded, the hollower it felt. I looked over at Tram and saw she didn't notice a thing. She was just fixated on filming close-ups of Kai, his watch, and the car keys on the table. As for my mother-in-law, it goes without saying. She looked at Kai as if she had found the ladder to elevate the whole family to a different level. Kai only had to say one thing. "When I marry Tram later, I'll bring you to live with us. A villa is too big and lonely without a mother's voice." Mrs. Fuang laughed until her face turned red. From that day on, Tram was completely infatuated with Kai. She posted photos constantly, holding hands in restaurants, sitting in luxury cars, or stories thanking him for treating her mother like his own. Mrs. Fuang was no different, bragging everywhere that her daughter was so lucky. Meeting a man who is both rich and thoughtful, not like some people who have money but are stingy. I knew the latter part was aimed at me, but I stayed silent. I didn't want to cause a scene over a few insinuations. One time, Kai took Mrs. Fuang and her daughter to the mall. That evening, Tram flaunted a dozen photos taken at designer bag, watch, and cosmetic counters. Mrs. Fuang showed her phone to everyone, marveling at how he opened her eyes to such unimaginable luxury. But looking closely, I noticed Tram only held a small paper bag from a budget accessory shop. It turned out Kai only bought her a hair clip and a discounted box of tea for Mrs. Fuang. The rest was just window shopping and photos. When I gently offered advice, Tram brushed it off. "Don't think everyone is as calculating as you and your husband. Rich people can buy things anytime. The important thing is he had the heart to take me." I looked at her, unsure whether to feel pity or anger. I told her I wasn't forbidding her from dating, but she should look into him carefully. A person who talks a lot about money but can't prove their real job is very dangerous. Tram gave a faint smile. "You're so used to cautious business deals that you're suspicious of everyone." Kwok Hung also spoke to his mother privately. "Mom, decent people don't go around promising villas, or luxury cars and lavish weddings right after meeting. Don't let sweet words blind you. Mrs. Fuang's expression darkened immediately upon hearing that. What do you mean by that? Are you and your wife upset that your sister found someone decent who loves her? Are you afraid she'll end up better off than you too? That statement made my husband go silent for a few seconds. Not because he had no argument, but because he realized his mother had chosen to trust a man she just met over her own son. As for me, I understood that from that moment on, any warning from my husband and me would be seen as sabotage. Fuang and her daughter no longer looked at Kai with normal eyes. They looked at him with greed, vanity, and the dream of being admired by everyone. And when people are lost in a beautiful dream, whoever wakes them up is considered an enemy. After that death anniversary meal, Kai began to appear at my mother-in-law's house more often. Some weeks he dropped by 2 or 3 times, and he never came empty-handed. Sometimes a bright red box of ginseng, sometimes cosmetics with foreign labels, other times silk scarves, imported liquor, or expensive tea. Everything looked classy and shiny enough to impress those who didn't know better. But strangely, not a single item had a clear receipt or any verifiable origin. Fuang was absolutely obsessed with them. She cleared an entire glass cabinet in the middle of the living room to display Kai's gifts, wiping them over and over like precious treasures. Whenever someone visited, she would pull them over to point out every single item. Isn't my future son-in-law thoughtful? He's young but knows how to act, unlike some people who have money but still nitpick every penny. When saying this, she would often glance at me or intentionally speak loudly when Kwok Hung was present. I understood she was mocking the fact that my husband and I had refused to lend Tram money to open a clothing shop just for making online videos. But I remained silent, because the more we argued, the more she would have an excuse to say I was jealous of my sister-in-law. Tram, at that time, seemed to be living in a daze. She changed how she dressed, how she talked, and even tried to walk in a more elegant way. She started calling Kai her future hubby on social media, posting pictures of a hand placed next to a wine glass, pictures of Kai's blazer shoulder captured half-heartedly, silhouettes of the two of them in a restaurant with dim yellow lights. Whenever someone commented asking if she was getting married, she wouldn't answer directly, just dropped a red heart. Enough to make people curious, enough to make her feel she was the center of attention. Kai also knew exactly how to indulge that weakness of Tram's. He occasionally took her to luxury hotels to take photos, brought her into high-end restaurants to sit for a while, chose nice angles to record videos, and then posted some very flashy-sounding captions. But I noticed that on those days, Tram never stayed happy for long when she got home. Once, she went into the bathroom to call a friend, her voice sounding irritated. "Yeah, I just paid for it first. He said his wallet was in the car. He'll transfer it back to me tomorrow, I guess." I overheard a snippet, and it made things even clearer to me. A man who truly wants to take care of his partner wouldn't keep making her pay for outings that he himself planned. Gradually, Tram started borrowing money more often. She borrowed from friends to buy dresses for photo shoots, borrowed money to book makeup artists and hire photographers. One day, she even ordered a huge bouquet just to take photos in a car, writing that he always knows what she likes. I looked at the photo and immediately recognized that bouquet as a common model sold online, the kind that comes with photo services, yet everyone in the comments praised her for having such a lucky life. That's the danger of living a fake life online. At first, it's just a photo, but then you have to borrow from your real life just to keep that image looking glamorous. One evening, I saw Tram post a photo holding luxury car keys, standing next to a shiny white car, its license plate covered with a heart icon. I looked closely and found the background familiar. It looked like the parking lot of a rental service near where we used to rent cargo vans. I asked softly, "Is that Kai's car?" Tram raised her head, full of pride. "If it's not his, whose would it be?" "That's a strange question." I just said, "If it's your own car, why cover the license plate?" Her expression instantly darkened. I didn't want to beat around the bush anymore, so I said it directly. "Tram, a man who is truly wealthy doesn't need to prove it with photos. The more someone acts, the more you should be cautious." She stood up abruptly, her voice rising sharply. "Can you please just stop? You're only used to small-time trading, so you don't understand the upper class. What car they drive, what they buy, and who they love is their business. Don't project your calculating mind onto my life." That remark left me speechless. Before I could answer, Mrs. Fuang stepped out from the kitchen. She had likely been listening for a while. She put her hands on her hips and glared at me with cold, sharp eyes. "Is she wrong? The girl is about to marry into wealth, and you, as her sister-in-law, should be happy for her instead of constantly nitpicking. Or is it that you're jealous because your sister-in-law is about to do better than you?" I looked at her, a sense of helplessness rising within me. I was clearly urging them to be cautious, but through her words, I became the petty one. Just then, Kwok Hung walked in from the yard. He heard his mother's last sentence, and his face immediately darkened. He set the bag on the table and looked straight at Mrs. Fuang. "Don't get it wrong, Mom. My wife isn't jealous of anyone. She just doesn't want our family to be deceived." Quote, the room went silent for a few seconds. Mrs. Fuang turned purple, while Tram's tears welled up instantly, so fast that I knew she was used to using tears to turn herself into a victim. She choked out, "Brother, you're talking to me like that too now? Ever since you married her, you don't love me anymore." Quote, Kwok Hung looked at his sister, his voice not loud but heavy. "I only say this because I care about you. If you only want to hear people flatter you, then you'll have to suffer the consequences yourself later." Quote, Tram burst into tears and turned to hug her mother. Mrs. Fuang immediately patted her daughter's back and turned back to scold him. "You've been led by the nose by your wife. Your sister is blessed to have met a good person. If you two can't help, then just stay quiet. Don't open your mouths to jinx things." Quote, from that day on, Mrs. Fuang essentially declared war on me and my husband. She forbade us from interfering in Tram's business. She banned us from mentioning Kai in a suspicious tone, and even declared to the relatives that later, when Tram marries into wealth, no one should come to claim kinship if they look down on her now. After saying that, she looked straight at me as if delivering an invisible slap. I didn't respond, just felt a chill in my heart. There are people who don't see the warning signs, not because they aren't there, but because they choose to close their eyes since the dream of wealth in front of them is too beautiful. That night on the way home, Kwok Hung drove for a long time without saying a word. I knew he was hurting, not because his mother scolded him, but because for the first time, he realized how far his mother and sister had gone. I placed my hand on his, whispering, "We've done enough. Whatever happens later, don't let them drag us into it." Quote. He nodded, his eyes still fixed on the road ahead. "I know that from now on, documents, money, everything must be clear. I won't let you get dragged into that drama." Back then, I didn't know that the drama was about to end in the most humiliating way, and the first person to pay the price was Nok Chom. Not long after my mother-in-law forbade us from interfering in Tram's business, that family began living in a very strange aura. That aura didn't come from the truth, but from filtered photos, vague statements, and sweet as sugar promises from Lam Kai. Bao Fuang smiled more than ever wherever she went, and Tram always seemed to be on cloud nine. Only Kwok Hung and I felt increasingly uneasy watching it. Then one morning, Tram called her mother, her voice trembling with excitement. I heard this later from Fuang's own mouth when she told the neighbors, so I remember it very clearly. Tram discovered she was pregnant. At first, she panicked and called Kai dozens of times, thinking he would avoid her, but surprisingly, he was very happy to hear the news. He said over the phone, "Don't worry, it's mine and I'll take responsibility. Let me arrange everything. I'll hold a proper engagement ceremony so your mother can hold her head high." Quote, just that one sentence, Bao Fuang and her daughter felt as if honey had been poured into their ears. Chom went from being fearful to feeling lightheaded with joy, thinking this pregnancy was her direct ticket into a wealthy family. Kai even told her to just post things subtly. "Don't be too specific. We need to keep the buzz going so that when I bring the gifts over, everyone will be surprised." That way of speaking, half truth and half act, should have made people suspicious. But for Tram, it was different. She felt like the protagonist in a luxury love story that everyone had to admire. From that day on, Tram's social media began to change its tone. She posted photos of her hand on her belly, a partially covered pregnancy test, a photo of an ultrasound sheet taken at an angle next to a bouquet of white flowers. Every caption was vague, waiting for the day they would live under the same roof. "Thank you for giving us a status." Some kinds of happiness don't need too many words. Acquaintances gradually started commenting. Some congratulated her. Some asked when the wedding was, while others sighed and said Chom was lucky. As for Mrs. Fuang, it goes without saying, if she had bragged about Kai 10 times before, ever since her daughter got pregnant, she bragged 100 times more. At the market, she told the fishmonger. At a funeral, she told the relatives. As soon as someone asked how she was doing, she would pull up a chair and say, "My grandchild will be born with a silver spoon in their mouth. That family is very well off. Kai is preparing for a grand wedding. He said he wouldn't let my daughter and grandchild suffer any disadvantage." Hearing these things through acquaintances, I only felt a heavy heart. I don't hate an unborn child, but I fear the way adults use that child to decorate their own greed and vanity. Kwok Hung only sighed. He told me he hoped he was wrong, because if that guy really had issues, Tram would be deeply hurt this time. I didn't answer because I felt the same way deep down. And then the day Kai's family was supposed to bring the engagement gifts over was delayed again and again. At first, Kai said he was busy closing a deal, then he claimed his mother was sick, and later that his family needed to pick a better date. Tram still believed him, and Mrs. Fuang still defended him. Whenever someone asked, she would laugh it off, saying people in big business have to choose auspicious dates, unlike ordinary folks who can just do it whenever. But all avoidance has its limits. One afternoon, Tram called Kai, but his phone was disconnected. Messages went unanswered, his social media accounts suddenly vanished, and their shared photos could no longer be seen. She ran to the apartment Kai had taken her to, the one he claimed was their future home, but the security guard said it was just a weekly rental. The tenant had checked out several days ago. Only then did Tram start to panic. She went to the place Kai had called his company. It was a shared office space located in a rather nice glass building. There was a reception desk and many company signs placed next to each other, so it looked very professional. But when Tram asked for Lam Kai, the receptionist just shook her head. He only rented a flexible desk a few times. He doesn't have a permanent company here. A simple sentence that felt like a bucket of ice water splashed in her face. It wasn't over yet. An elderly security guard saw Tram standing frozen, clutching her stomach in the lobby, and clicked his tongue, whispering, "Are you looking for that guy Kai too? I've seen him bring other ladies here to take photos before." He introduced every single one of them as his fiancée. Upon hearing this, Tram nearly collapsed. She hadn't just been swindled out of her money and innocence. She had been cast as just another role in his game. The title of fiancé, that she was so proud of, turned out to be just a line Kai used over and over again on girl after girl. When Mrs. Fuang found out, she was truly panicked, but what she feared most wasn't her daughter being abandoned, but the world finding out how much she had bragged. She locked the doors all day, not daring to step outside. Whenever someone called to ask about the wedding, she gave vague excuses about the groom's family being busy, while Tram wept and smashed her phone, yet still remembered to delete comments on her old posts, afraid people would discover the truth. At that point, the mother and daughter should have come to their senses and acknowledged that my husband and I hadn't warned them in vain. But no, the more prideful a person is, the harder it is for them to admit they are wrong. Mrs. Fuang called Kwok Hung, her voice trembling with anger, saying that back then we cursed her, wishing she would be cheated, and that was why Kai left, claiming we had loose, spiteful tongues and couldn't keep our words to ourselves. Kwok Hung listened for a few seconds, then hung up. He didn't want to argue with his mother at that moment. The truth mattered less to them than finding someone to blame. That evening, Tram sobbed to her mother that she couldn't return to their old house. The neighbors already knew she was pregnant, and her friends all thought she was about to marry a wealthy man. If she were to slink back home now, people would laugh her to death. She also refused to rent a normal apartment, saying she was used to being looked at with admiration and couldn't let people see her fallen state. Hearing that, I felt both sad and chilled. For someone who, even while pregnant, fears losing their image more than their life falling apart, their suffering is not just caused by being deceived, but by their own illusions. And then Mrs. Fuang thought of my house. In her eyes, our place was spacious, clean, and private, enough to hide Tram's disgrace. If Chom were brought to my house, she could tell relatives that her daughter is being cared for by us while waiting for the groom's family to settle things. If I gave an extra 15 million each month, Tram could still dress well, see good doctors, and keep up the appearance that the future in-laws care about. So the next afternoon, Mrs. Fuang dragged Chom and 2 suitcases to my front gate. She didn't come to ask, she came to make an announcement. She thought that by putting Chom's pregnant belly in front of me, mentioning blood ties, and using the family's reputation as a threat, I would soften up like in years past. But she miscalculated one thing. After everything he has seen, Kwok Hung is no longer the son who just bows his head to keep the peace. And this time, the door to my house won't easily open for greed to walk in. After Kwok Hung's words, our living room was so quiet you could clearly hear the ticking of the wall clock. Mrs. Fuang stood frozen for a few seconds, her face turning from red to purple, while Chom clutched her belly, lips trembling. Perhaps she didn't expect the brother who used to be so yielding could speak so bluntly right in front of their mother. But Mrs. Fuang is not someone who gives up easily. She pulled a chair and plopped down in the middle of the room, one hand clutching her chest, the other pointing at my husband, her voice trembling like someone deeply wounded. "Hung, I never expected you to say something like that. A pregnant girl abandoned by a man, and you two are still this heartless? Your own flesh and blood, yet you treat her like a complete stranger." After speaking, she turned her face away, raising her hand to wipe her eyes, but I clearly saw there wasn't a single tear. Seeing her mother's act, Tram immediately chimed in. She stepped forward and tugged my arm, her voice choking up. Sister Myan, I know I wasn't always right to you before, but I'm truly suffering now. You just need to let me stay temporarily. I promise I won't be a bother. I'm this pregnant, where else can I go? If anyone only heard that much, they would surely feel pity. A pregnant girl abandoned by a man, dragging a suitcase to beg her brother and sister-in-law for shelter. But I have lived in this family long enough to know that the softest words are sometimes velvet-wrapped nooses. Before I could answer, Tram continued, her voice soft but calculated. If possible, could I stay in the large room on the second floor? That room has a window. It's airy, while the small room is quite stifling for a pregnant woman. Besides, I often have trouble breathing and need my own air conditioning. The air purifier you have in the living room, could you please move it up for me? I'm worried that the dust might affect the baby. I listened, laughing bitterly inside. A minute ago she said she wouldn't be a bother, and the next she's choosing rooms, appliances, and how to rearrange someone else's house. Seeing me silent, Bao Fuang thought I was out of arguments and immediately jumped in. That's right, she's pregnant and needs a clean, airy place to stay. I think your second floor room is being wasted, and her diet shouldn't be neglected either. Give her 15 million a month, it's not that much. There's prenatal care, supplements, pregnancy milk, maternity clothes, and skincare costs too. A girl still needs to maintain her appearance. She shouldn't let herself go or look worn out. Otherwise, people will laugh at us later. I looked at her, truly unsure whether to feel angry or sad. At this point, the only thing she cares about is what people will think. Tram has been abandoned, and the baby's future is uncertain. Kai has disappeared without a trace. Yet, the two of them are still thinking about designer maternity clothes, skincare, and keeping up appearances. I asked slowly, Mother, please clarify this for me. Do you want us to provide for Tram's pregnancy or for her to keep maintaining her posh online image? Tram immediately pulled her hand back, her face flushing red. Quote, what do you mean by that? Are you looking down on me? Before I could answer, Kwok Hung spoke up. He looked his sister straight in the eye, his voice colder than I had ever heard. Quote, if you had the money to live for show, you can face the consequences yourself. No one is obligated to feed your vanity. That sentence hit Tram like a slap to the face. She stood frozen, tears streaming down instantly. This time, perhaps it wasn't just an act, but her pride being stung in a sore spot. Tram turned to her mother, crying and blaming her. I told you back then not to listen to them. You kept talking and talking. That's why Kai got annoyed and left. I felt a chill down my spine listening to that. Even now, she still refuses to face the truth. Kai was the one who left. Kai was the one putting on a show, and she was the one who jumped into it with her eyes open. Yet, in the end, they still want to pin all the blame on us. Bao Fuang immediately pulled her daughter into her arms, stroking her back like a child. Don't cry, honey. As long as I'm alive, I won't let anyone bully you. Then she turned to us, her voice growing sharper. You two think this is just Tram's private business. If this gets out, people will call this family cold-hearted and cruel. A sister left unwed and pregnant. You're wealthy, yet you won't take her in. Will your clients and partners still respect you if they hear about this? You need a reputation to do business, don't you? This time, Kwok Hung laughed. Not a happy laugh, but one of utter disappointment. He stood up, adjusted his sleeves, and spoke every word clearly. Mother, in the business world, people look at reputation, contracts, product quality, and how you keep your word. Nobody judges a partner based on my sister having an unplanned pregnancy. Bao Fuang opened her mouth to argue, but he didn't let her interrupt. He continued, decent business people aren't afraid of family stumbles, they're afraid of being tied to liars, debtors, and scammers who try to cover it up. That sentence made Mrs. Fuang freeze. Tram also stopped crying for a moment, as if she had been pulled out of her victim role. I looked at my husband, feeling both pained and relieved. For all these years, he always avoided speaking harshly to his mother, yet today his words were so blunt that no one could pretend not to understand. Mrs. Fuang said with a trembling voice, You think I'm a liar, Hung? Kwok Hung looked at his mother, his eyes red but his voice calm. I didn't say you were a liar. I just said that only those who have lived a lie for too long are afraid of others knowing the truth. The whole room felt like someone had sucked all the air out of it. Bao Fuang gripped the armrest tightly, her face turning pale. Tram kept her head bowed, one hand still clutching her stomach, the other gripping her bag strap until it wrinkled. I know that stung, but perhaps it needed to be that painful. Because if no one spoke the truth, that mother and daughter would continue using the word honor to tie us down, using that pregnancy to force us to open our door, and using family ties to turn my home into a cover for a story they had deliberately ignored from the start. The atmosphere in the house was tense as a bowstring. Outside, it had already turned dark. The yellow light in the living room cast shadows on faces that were both angry and humiliated. I looked at the two suitcases on the floor and suddenly realized they didn't look like the luggage of people seeking refuge. They looked like two sacks filled with vanity, greed, and the consequences that Mrs. Fuang and her daughter wanted to dump on my home. And for the first time, I was certain that my husband had truly chosen to stand by our own household instead of bowing his head and letting others cross the line anymore. After the day Mrs. Fuang and her daughter dragged their suitcases away in shame, I thought they would at least know to stop for a while. But no, people panicked by the loss of face rarely sit still to reflect on themselves. They will try to cling to whatever remains, even a tattered, worn-out lie. Mrs. Fuang still called Kwok Hung several times, sometimes accusing him of being unfilial, other times calling me a heartless daughter-in-law, but he didn't argue back anymore. He only said one sentence: "When you are calm and speak the truth, I will listen." I didn't want to get involved in that matter any further either, but life often doesn't let you stay on the sidelines, especially when a con artist has been lurking around your family. A few days later, while I was checking orders at the shop, my phone suddenly rang. It was Mr. Tung, an old business partner who used to import goods from me years ago. He rarely called personally, as he usually messaged through his assistant, so I found it a bit strange when I saw his name pop up. As soon as I picked up, Mr. Tung asked immediately, his voice urgent and somewhat annoyed. Quote, I'm asking you honestly, does your family know this guy? I froze. Which guy, sir? There was a few seconds of silence on the other end, then he sent me a screenshot. It was a photo Chom had once posted. Kai was wearing a black shirt and sunglasses, standing next to her in front of a luxury car. Under the photo was a catchy caption: "There are people who arrive to make you believe that kindness still exists in this life." I looked at the photo, and a chill naturally ran down my spine. I asked, "Do you know this person?" Mr. Tung let out a scoff, but there was no joy in it at all. "Do I know him?" "Yes, and honestly, you should stay as far away from him as possible. His full name is Lei Min Kai. People call him Kai the Shadow. He's no businessman, just a petty broker. Today he's peddling land, tomorrow cars, and the next day he's pushing loans. He talks about trillion dong projects, but market vendors are still calling out his name for debts." I sat up straight, my hand gripping the phone tightly. Even though my husband and I had been suspicious before, hearing it confirmed by someone who has dealt with him in business felt very different. I asked further, "Are you sure?" "He is dating my sister-in-law, and there is even talk of a pregnancy now." Quote, the other end of the line went silent for a few seconds, then Mr. Tung's voice dropped. "Damn, he's playing the same old trick again." Hearing the words, "same old trick," my heart began to pound. Mr. Tung recounted that Kai is from a coastal region and already has a wife and a young son. His wife's name is Tui, a hard-working and devoted woman. She used to help her family sell seafood, scraping together some capital for her husband to start a business, but Kai didn't do honest work. He took his wife's money, even money from her parents for investment, then used it to rent luxury cars and short-term apartments to take girls out, building an image of a successful entrepreneur. Mr. Tung said something that made me freeze. The money he used to show off to those women was mostly money his wife had painstakingly saved. There was a time his wife brought their child to ask me about him, crying so hard she couldn't even stand. He took the money intended for her family's goods and claimed it was a loss. Yet, on the outside, he was still posting photos showing off his lavish life. I felt choked up listening to this. A man who uses his wife and child's money to fuel a flashy facade for deceitful affairs is truly more pathetic than being poor. I called Kwok Hung to the shop immediately afterward. He had just walked in and saw my unusual expression, immediately asking, "What's wrong?" I handed him the phone to listen to the recording of my call with Mr. Tung. After hearing that, Kwok Hung sat still for a long time, the veins in his hands bulging on the table. A while later, he sighed in a heavy voice, saying that he could tell by the way the guy spent money that no truly wealthy person would show off like that, but he hadn't expected him to already have a wife and kids. I said the problem is that Mom and Tram won't believe us if we just tell them. Kwok Hung nodded. He knew, but we had to get the facts, not to save their face, but to protect ourselves. If that guy had targeted our family, we couldn't just pretend we didn't know. That statement made me suddenly recall Kai's gaze during the memorial service, the way he hinted at questions about my husband's and my work, where we lived, and if we did any additional real estate business. At the time, I just felt uncomfortable. Thinking back now, I realize he had been observing us from very early on. From that day, I started digging for more information through a few acquaintances. Not to pry into his private life out of curiosity, but because I needed to know how dangerous that man really was. A friend working in the car rental industry confirmed that Kai used to rent cars by the day. He would even haggle intensely, then pretend they were his own when taking photos. Another person shared that he took several girls to the same luxury cafe, always choosing the table by the glass window to get the best pictures. Even scarier, one girl was once lured by him into taking out a loan on his behalf. He said he just needed to borrow it temporarily for capital to import goods, promising to pay back both principal and interest in a few weeks. She believed him because he promised to marry her and buy an apartment. In the end, he vanished, leaving her saddled with a debt of nearly $100 million. Every story was the same. First came the fancy gifts, then the trips to upscale places for photos, then grand promises about the future, and finally, borrowing money. Then he would either disappear or turn around and shift the blame. The more I heard, the more I shivered. Tram is not the first girl he has deceived, but the most painful part is that she was warned so many times. It's not that she didn't see the signs, she just didn't want to see them. She would rather trust a man she just met, as long as he gave her the feeling of entering the upper class, better than believing my brother and sister-in-law, who have already been blunt many times. That evening, I walked into Kwok Hung's office, where he sat with several photos and messages from acquaintances in front of him. None of it was enough for legal action, but it was enough to see that Kai is not a decent person. I asked him if he intended to tell his mother. Kwok Hung was silent for a moment before replying, but I know Mom will just say we're making it up. I looked at him, my heart sinking. Some truths are painful, not because they are hard to understand, but because the person who needs to hear them refuses to listen. Kwok Hung picked up his phone to call his mother. He didn't beat around the bush, simply saying, "Mom, I just found out Kai has a wife and children back home. He's not a businessman, he's in debt and has swindled many people." The other end was silent for a moment before Mrs. Fuang's voice erupted harshly. "Did you hear that from someone? Or is your wife putting you up to this? Isn't the family suffering enough for you to stop pouring oil on the fire?" Kwok Hung closed his eyes, his voice weary. "Whether you believe it or not is up to you. But from now on, don't use the family reputation to pressure us anymore. Let's keep matters separate. Deal with mistakes where they happen." Mrs. Fuang hung up the phone abruptly. I looked at my husband without saying a word. He set the phone on the table, his expression strangely sorrowful. I realized at that moment he wasn't disappointed because she didn't believe him, but because he saw she valued pride more than the truth. And it was precisely from the truth about Kai's wife back home that the next wave began to rise, much stronger than anything Mrs. Fuang and her daughter could have imagined. After the call was cut off by his mother, Kwok Hung sat still for a long time. I knew he had done all he could as a son, advising, warning, and telling the truth. But in Mrs. Fuang's eyes at that moment, the truth was less important than who was making her lose face. Some people, once they have built a glamorous stage for the world to see, would rather continue acting in fear than step down and admit they were wrong. Rumors began to spread very quickly. At first, it was just a few questions at the market. A fishmonger saw Mrs. Fuang and smiled knowingly. "Oh, haven't seen you bragging about your precious son-in-law lately, have we? When are you marrying your daughter into that mansion so we can have a feast?" The question sounded like a joke, but it hit where it hurt. Mrs. Fuang forced a smile and said, "The groom's family is picking a date." Then they left in such a rush, they even forgot to buy fish. The next day, someone else asked, "Tram's belly is getting quite big, isn't it? The wedding needs to be soon, or it will look quite unsightly." Quote, someone else chimed in, "I heard the groom's family is very wealthy. Why is it so quiet?" Quote, if it were before, Mrs. Fuang would have likely boasted about it for another half hour. But now, every question felt like a needle pricking her balloon of pride. She started going to the market less, and when she did, she chose off hours, wearing a hat and mask as if afraid of being recognized. Tram was different. She didn't dare go out much, but online, she still tried to maintain a calm appearance. She took an old photo from a resort trip with Kai, adjusted the colors, and posted it with the caption, "As long as my child is safe, I can endure any storm." It sounded so heartbreaking to read. People who didn't know the truth even chimed in to comfort her, telling the expectant mother to be strong. But looking at that photo, I recognized it was taken months ago, when Kai was still playing the role of a wealthy boyfriend. Tram's pain back then wasn't just being abandoned, but also not daring to let others see she had been abandoned. Then, social media started to not be as easily fooled as she thought. A few strange comments appeared under the post. Someone asked, "Hey, is the man in the photo Lay Min Kai? Why does he look like Tui from my hometown?" Quote, another account posted a photo of Kai in a t-shirt, holding a baby boy while standing next to a woman on a small beach. Under the photo, they wrote, he already has a wife and child, yet he's still playing the role of a single wealthy bachelor? I wasn't the first one to see it. Tram saw it first and called her mother in a panic, then deleted the post very quickly, but deleting it only made people more curious. Screenshots had already spread through family groups and neighbor groups, circling back until they appeared right before Mrs. Fuang's eyes. She was struggling to hide the fact that Kai had run away, and now, there was the added news that he had a wife and child. The mask of the precious son-in-law fell so fast that she couldn't even reach out to catch it. That afternoon, Bao Fuang dragged Tram over to my house again. This time there was no suitcase, but the atmosphere was heavier than before. As soon as Tram walked in, she flopped onto a chair, clutching her belly, her eyes puffy. Bao Fuang looked gaunt, but her voice was still trying to sound firm. Hung, it's a real mess now, you have to help your mother. I set a teacup down in front of her and asked very gently, what do you want us to help with, Mom? She looked at me, lowering her voice as if afraid someone might overhear. Let Tram come over and stay with you. And this month, transfer 15 million to her first. She needs checkups, food, and to keep her spirits up. The important thing is that people are scrutinizing this whole situation now. If she stays at my house, everyone will just keep talking. If she's at your place, people will think you're taking care of her, so it won't be so disgraceful. I stared at her for a long time. It turns out that after all this, what she wants isn't a solution for Tram, but a nicer curtain to hide the truth. I asked, when you were bragging everywhere, did you ask if we wanted to be involved? When you said we were jealous and sabotaging Tram, did you think there'd come a day when you'd need us to act as your shield? Mrs. Fuang was speechless. A few seconds later, unable to answer, she turned bitter. You're rich but cold-blooded. Your husband's family is in trouble, and all you do is stand aside and lecture me. Don't blame his family for being heartless later. Before I could answer, Tram burst into tears, her voice cracking. Do you want me to die, sister? People are digging up my past, they're insulting me, and now you're asking me questions like that. Kwok Hung, who had been silent the whole time, suddenly slammed his glass onto the table. The sharp clack echoed in the room. He looked at his mother, then at his sister, his voice restrained but every word clear. Stop it, Mom. She was cheated, and now you're trying to exploit my wife too. Mrs. Fuang widened her eyes. What did you say? I'm exploiting you and your wife? Kwok Hung replied immediately. Isn't that right? You don't need our help to get Tram back on her feet. You need us as a decent backdrop to cover up all those things you used to brag about. The room went dead silent. I saw Tram's shoulders trembling, not sure if it was from crying or from anger. Bao Fuang pursed her lips, intending to argue, but Hung continued, his voice even colder. What you regret isn't Tram's honor. What you regret is the dream of becoming in-laws with a wealthy family. You regret the bragging you did at the market. You regret the prestige of being called a wealthy mother-in-law. If you truly loved Tram, you would have made her wake up long ago. That statement laid everything bare. Bao Fuang turned pale, her eyes wide, her lips trembling, unable to utter a single word. Tram clutched her stomach and slumped to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. Seeing that scene, I felt no triumph, only sadness. A mother who should have pulled her child out of the mud ended up pushing her deeper just for the sake of pride. A girl who should have been caring for the baby in her womb was only worried about netizens discovering she was no longer a tycoon's future wife. Mrs. Fuang stood up, clutching the chair, her voice hoarse. Fine, you two are clever, just remember this day. Kwok Hung didn't avert his eyes from his mother, he just said, I remember, I will remember this day as the day you chose pride over the truth. She pulled Tram up and led her toward the door. Tram turned back to look at me, her gaze filled with both resentment and despair, as if all her shame were my fault for not giving her a place to hide. The door closed, and the house returned to silence, but I knew the storm had not ended there. Because once a lie has started to be uncovered by others, it won't stop just because its owner cries or because Bao Fuang and her daughter try to hide it. The truth behind Lam Kai will only find its way into the light. That afternoon, the sky was gloomy from the start, gray clouds hanging low over the roof, making the atmosphere feel heavy as well. I was at home reviewing my books when the gate bell rang. Through the camera screen, I saw a woman standing in front of the gate. She was thin, with her hair tied low, holding the hand of a boy about 5 years old. She was dressed very simply in a light-colored shirt and black pants, with an old cloth bag over her shoulder. She didn't look like someone here to cause trouble, but her gaze was strange, so calm it made me uneasy. I opened the gate. The woman looked at me, nodding slightly. "You are my Anne, aren't you?" "I am Thuy, the legal wife of Lê Minh Khai." Just that one sentence made my whole body turn cold. Even though I had heard before that Khai had a wife and child, when the real wife stood right in front of me, leading a child with eyes strikingly like Khai's, everything suddenly became more real, more painful, and more bitter. I invited her inside and immediately called Quoc Hung to come home. Perhaps Thuy also guessed that this wasn't something to be discussed lightly, so she didn't beat around the bush. She placed a thin folder on the table, containing a marriage certificate, wedding photos, family photos, and some bank transaction copies. She didn't cry, didn't scream, and didn't act out of jealousy as people might expect. She just sat straight, her hands resting on her knees, her voice hoarse but clear. "I did not come here to humiliate anyone. I came so that everyone knows Miss Tram is not the first person my husband has deceived." Right at that moment, Bao Phuong and Tram were also called over by Quoc Hung. At first, Bao Phuong marched in furiously, thinking we were cooking up something to scare her and her daughter, but as soon as she saw the papers on the table and the wedding photo of Khai and Thuy, she stopped dead, and Tram turned to stone. She picked up the photo, her eyes wide, her lips trembling. In the photo, Khai was wearing a black suit, smiling radiantly beside a woman in a white wedding dress. The photo was taken many years ago. It could not be fake, nor could it be a misunderstanding. Tram stammered, "This is impossible." He said he had never married anyone. Thuy looked at her, her gaze not hateful but painfully weary. "He also once told me that apart from me, no other woman made him want to start a family." With a man like that, which of his words do you think are true? That question hung in the living room, and no one could answer. Bao Phuong collapsed into a chair, her face turning paler by the second, while I saw Quoc Hung's hands tighten into fists. The little boy who came with Thuy had been sitting quietly by his mother's side the whole time. He stared at Tram for a long time, then innocently asked, "Mom, why does Dad have a baby with this lady?" The room felt suffocated, silenced by a child's remark. It held no blame or sarcasm, yet the sting was enough that none of the adults dared to look at one another. Tram clutched her stomach as tears welled up, but this time, it wasn't the kind of crying meant to elicit pity. She wept because, for the first time, she saw the true consequences of a relationship she once thought was glorious. Thuy opened the files one by one, explaining how Khai had taken over $1 billion in family savings. That money was supposed to be used for home repairs, their children's education, and supporting both their parents. He claimed he was investing it, promising quick returns, but he actually used it to rent luxury cars, apartments, and offices by the hour to impress various women. She spoke slowly, recalling months where she had to borrow money from her sister for milk, while he was out dining in 5-star restaurants with someone else. No one said a word. Mrs. Phuong kept her head bowed, but I knew she was listening to every single word. Thuy then pulled out a stack of photographs. In the photos, Khai appeared alongside many different women. He brought every one of them to the exact same types of settings: luxury cars, beautiful hotels, high-end cafes, and gleaming glass offices. Some were holding bouquets identical to the one Tram had once bragged about. Some had even posted pictures of their hands wearing rings, with captions waiting for the day they would share a home. Each photo was like a knife tearing through the dream of marrying into wealth that Tram had clung to so tightly. Tram asked shakily, "So, he lied to everyone?" Thuy looked at her and replied, softly yet coldly, "No. He only lied to those who wanted to believe him. You weren't the first, but you were the one he thought he could squeeze for the most." Upon hearing that, I saw Mrs. Phuong startle and look up. Quoc Hung also looked at me. We both shared the same gut feeling. And sure enough, Thuy said the next sentence that left the whole family stunned before they vanished. Quote, "He once bragged to an acquaintance of mine that he was about to bleed your family dry. He said the younger sister was easy to fool, the mother was fame-hungry, but the siblings were the real gold mine." That remark was like a bucket of cold water splashed directly in the faces of Phuong and her daughter. It turned out that from the start, Khai wasn't just targeting Chom. He saw my husband and me behind her, this house, our business, and the money Phuong loved to brag to everyone that her daughter-in-law had. I turned to look at Quoc Hung. His face darkened, his jaw clenched. All our previous warnings hadn't been for nothing. That man had calculated every step very carefully. He used cheap gifts to buy Phuong's favor, used rental cars and empty promises to charm Chom, then waited for the pregnancy so her family could pressure my husband and me. If we had been soft-hearted, if Kwok Hung hadn't been firm that day, we probably would have been dragged into that trap by the very meaning of family. Phuong suddenly stammered, I didn't know. I thought he truly loved the girl. Tui looked at her. For the first time, her gaze turned sharp. You didn't know because you didn't want to know. When people warned you, you said they were just jealous. When people asked for documents, you said they were being calculating. You only wanted to hear about villas, wealth, and marrying into a high-status family. Phuong kept her head bowed, unable to utter a single word in her defense. Chom sat slumped on the floor, clutching her belly and sobbing. I looked at the little boy nestled in his mother's arms, feeling a lump in my throat. Adults are greedy, deceitful, and blind. In the end, children are the ones forced to see things they should never have to understand. That afternoon, after Tui left my house, the living room remained silent for a long time. No one spoke of the 15 million per month anymore, and no one mentioned the large room on the second floor. Because everyone understood that Phuong and her daughter hadn't just brought a pregnancy to my home, but an entire trap set by Lam Kai from the very beginning. After Tui took her son and left, Phuong sat motionless on the sofa for a long time. That back, which was always held straight out of pride, seemed to slump down completely. Chom sat on the floor, hands clutching her belly, her eyes swollen and red, staring blankly into space. The living room was so quiet that even the sound of traffic outside could be heard clearly. I thought that after hearing all those truths, they would have come to their senses, at least a little. At the very least, they should realize that the man they treated like gold was nothing but a fraud. As for us, we never sabotaged them. We were only trying to keep them from falling into a pit. But I overestimated their self-respect. People used to living for vanity, even when the truth hits them in the face, don't think they're wrong. They only think about how to make others save them from shame. Mrs. Phuong looked up at Kwok Hung, her voice growing raspy. Hung, dear, I know I misjudged people this time, but Chom is your sister after all. She's pregnant and was deceived by that man. We can't just stand by and watch. Kwok Hung did not answer yet. He just stood by the table, eyes fixed on the papers Ms. Tui had left behind. I saw in his eyes not only anger but also the pain of a son watching his mother still refuse to let go of her demanding habits. Seeing his silence, Mrs. Phuong quickly continued, her voice softer. How about this, you and your wife are well off. If she can't live with you, just buy her a small apartment. It doesn't have to be in her name alone. She can co-own it with my Anne. Consider it a place for her to stabilize her mind, and I'll figure things out later. Hearing that, my whole body went cold. I looked at her in disbelief. Ms. Tui had just exposed that Kai was targeting my husband's and my money and assets. Yet Mrs. Phuong could still open her mouth to suggest that Chom co-own an apartment with me. She didn't think about how dangerous that was, nor why my assets should be tied to someone tangled in debt, pregnancy, and romantic scandals. All that was in her head at that moment was one thing. She needed a house so the world would think her daughter still had a decent way out. I set my teacup down and asked very slowly, Mom, you just heard what Ms. Tui said, and you're still thinking about letting Chom co-own property with me. Mrs. Phuong avoided my eyes, her voice starting to sound annoyed. I'm not saying give it away, we're all family here. As a sister-in-law, when your sibling is in trouble, what's the harm in co-signing to help out a little? I gave a cold laugh. A little to her was an entire apartment. A little was the life savings my husband and I had sweated years to build. Kwok Hung suddenly turned and walked toward the small desk beside the living room. He pulled open the drawer and took out a thick stack of papers, neatly clipped together. I knew that stack of papers. Those were the records he had silently kept for the past few years, not to brag, but so that one day, if needed, we could clearly look back at just how much we had been bled dry. He placed the stack in front of his mother, the sound of paper hitting the desk sharp and dry. Bao Phuong frowned. What is this? Kwok Hung pushed the papers toward her, his voice cold and calm. See for yourself, Mom. Money for your roof repairs, money to pay off your debts, your eye surgery bills, Chom's makeup classes, money Chom borrowed for a phone, bags, props for photos, every item, every date, every transfer. Bao Phuong flipped through a few pages, her face beginning to pale. Chom also looked up, her red-rimmed eyes flashing with panic. The numbers sat neatly on the paper, no insults, no complaints, yet heavier than any accusation. Kwok Hung looked at his mother for a long time then said, Do you know what's the scariest part, Mom? It's that you've gotten so used to demanding money from us that you think it's your right. Bao Fuang flinched as if she had been touched on a raw nerve. How can you say something like that? I am your mother. Kwok Hung nodded, his eyes turning red. I know you're my mother, that's why I've helped for so many years, but being a mother doesn't give you the right to turn your children's kindness into a bottomless obligation. As soon as he finished, Bao Fuang pressed her lips together, and tears began to fall. But this time, I didn't know if they were tears of hurt or because she had been exposed. Kwok Hung turned to Chom, his voice dropping, not shouting, but each word landing like a strike on the table. Quote, as for you, you don't love a wealthy man. You only love the feeling of people looking at you like you're wealthy. You don't need a decent man. You need a prop to show off, which is why you were led on by someone like Kai with a few rented cars, some fake gifts, and empty promises. Tram burst into tears and wailed, you're so cruel, I'm your sister, I'm pregnant. If you don't care about me, that's fine, but how could you say that? Kwok Hung looked at his sister, his expression pained but unyielding. He replied, I love you, that's why I'm telling the truth. If I kept giving you money to live in a fantasy, that would be hurting you. Bao Fuang slammed her hand on the table, her voice rising again, we're blood, yet you calculate every single cent. I really raised a son just to lose him. Kwok Hung stood up straight, looking at his mother and then at Tram. Then he said the words that I knew for certain would end a long period of endurance in his heart. Quote, blood ties are not a ticket to parasite off someone else's life. The whole room went dead silent. Bao Fuang opened her mouth, but couldn't get a word out. Tram also stopped crying for a few seconds, as if that very sentence had drained away her last defenses. Kwok Hung walked to the door and swung it wide open. The outside breeze blew in, making the curtains sway slightly. He continued, his voice no longer angry, just resolute. Quote, from today on, if you still use vanity, what people think, or blood ties to pressure my wife, then you can go out and live with that vanity. This house will not tolerate any more mistakes wrapped in moral righteousness. Bao Fuang tremblingly stood up. In her eyes, there was anger, humiliation, and a bit of fear because, for the first time, her son was not bowing his head. Tram propped herself up, held her belly, and followed her mother. As she stepped out the door, she turned back to look at me, her eyes filled with resentment. But I was no longer afraid of that look. I only saw a girl who was gradually losing all the fake things she had once held onto so tightly. The door closed behind them. Kwok Hung stood still for a long time, his shoulders slumping as if he had just lifted a heavy stone off his chest. I walked over to him and gently took his hand. His hand was ice cold. He didn't say anything, just squeezed my hand very tightly. For the first time in years, I saw my husband not only protecting me but also freeing himself from the weakness that had clung to him for so long. And I understood that from that moment on, Fuang and her daughter could no longer enter my house using the excuse of family ties to demand anything else. That evening, after Fuang and her daughter left my house, I thought they would at least have a night to be quiet and reflect. But some mistakes, when accompanied by so much boasting and so many questionable sums of money, leave no time for people to calm down. It is like a pile of dry straw, just a small spark can ignite a fire. Around 10 p.m., Kwok Hung's phone rang continuously. He looked at the screen, saw his mother's name, and frowned. I sat beside him, feeling a bad premonition in my heart. As soon as he picked up, Fuang's gasping voice echoed from the other end. Hung, come over to my house right now. He called, that guy Kai called. Her voice no longer had the arrogance of earlier that afternoon, but trembled like someone who had just seen a ghost. Kwok Hung turned on the speakerphone. Tram's crying could be heard in the background. Mom, I'm done for, he's ruined me. My husband and I looked at each other, and he asked briefly, what did Kai say when he called? Fuang replied incoherently, saying he threatened to leak recordings and claimed Tram also spent his money and was an accomplice in the fraud. Come over, I don't know what to do anymore. We drove to Fuang's house. The old house was lit up but felt unusually cold. Tram sat huddled on the chair, her hair disheveled, holding her phone tightly. Fuang paced back and forth in the living room, her face deathly pale. Seeing Kwok Hung, she rushed to grab his hand. Look at what he sent to your sister. Tram tremblingly opened the message Thoi Kai had just sent. His voice echoed through the phone speaker, raspy but full of sarcasm. Don't think that holding that belly means you've trapped me. You've spent my money too. The gifts I gave, the money I transferred, the places I took you, you enjoyed it all. Now you intend to play the victim? Tram burst into tears. It wasn't you seducing me? You said you loved me. Kai sneered in the next recording. You're not so innocent either. You once said your siblings are loaded, if you just play hardball, they'll have to cough it up. I've kept it all. Don't force me to leak it online. Hearing that, Bao Fuang staggered and sat down on the chair. What's terrifying isn't just that Kai fled, but that he's prepared to bite back. Someone like him not only plays with fire but keeps a weapon handy for when he's cornered. Right after that, Chom's phone lit up again. Kai sent a short recording, where Chom's voice was clear but cleverly edited. Just leave it to me. My siblings have so much money. My mom said, as long as you get pregnant, they won't dare to abandon you. Chom screamed and threw the phone onto the chair. He edited it. He's framing me, I didn't mean it that way. But the living room remained silent. Because whether it was edited or not, it was still her voice, enough for outsiders to interpret it in the worst way. Kai sent one more spine-chilling line. In this life, whoever holds the proof first wins. Don't make me post it. Tram buried her face and sobbed. Bao Fuang was truly panicked now. She no longer asked what Tram had said or done with Kai. She just turned to Kwok Hung, pleading, find a way to bury that recording, you know so many people in business. Ask someone to handle it. If he leaks it online, how will Chom ever face anyone again? Kwok Hung looked at his mother for a long time. He didn't yell, but his gaze was so cold that Bao Fuang lowered her voice. He said, Mother, don't be mistaken. Doing business doesn't mean knowing how to silence the world. Bao Fuang choked up, and he continued, if he threatens to release recordings to extort money or smear us, call the police. But if you want me to clean up Tram's past so everyone can keep acting like innocent victims, I won't do it. I looked at Chom. She was crying and shaking her head. We can't call the police. If we report it, what if they ask how I received the money? That sentence made both me and Kwok Hung freeze. Mrs. Fuang immediately snapped, shut up, but it was too late. I asked slowly, Tram, what money did you receive? She hung her head, her shoulders trembling. Mrs. Fuang quickly jumped in, she doesn't know anything. That guy probably just sent her some pocket money. Kwok Hung placed his hand on the table, his voice deepening, Mom, if you keep hiding things at this point, no one can save us. Tram cried for a while before speaking in broken sentences. It turned out that while dating Kai, she not only received gifts, but also borrowed money from friends and relatives, even using Mrs. Fuang's name to collect funds for Kai's projects. Sometimes 20 million, sometimes 50 million. People gave money because they believed Tram was about to marry into a rich family. They trusted Mrs. Fuang when she said her future son-in-law had a big project and was just temporarily rotating capital. I felt a chill down my spine. In total, Tram had collected nearly 300 million, part of which she gave directly to Kai, and part used to maintain their lavish facade, renting cars, booking restaurants, buying clothes, and hiring photo studios. Mrs. Fuang sat beside her, her face turning ashen. I looked at her, realizing why she didn't want to report this to the police. She was afraid of revealing not just that her daughter was scammed, but also that she herself had used her reputation to verbally guarantee those loans. Kwok Hung asked his mother in a very low voice, did you know that Tram was borrowing money from people? Mrs. Fuang's lips trembled, but she still tried to defend herself. I only thought it was a temporary fix. Kai said he would pay it all back after the wedding. Who would have thought? I interrupted. Who would have thought? My wife told you so many times, but you wouldn't listen. I told you so many times, and you said I was being pushed by my wife. Now you're saying, who would have thought? Tram looked up, her face blurred with tears. Big brother, please help me. I was wrong. You just need to lend me the money to pay back our relatives first, and for Kai, we can figure it out later. Kwok Hung looked at his sister, his eyes pained but no longer soft. He replied, you still don't understand. Money cannot fix your lies. If I pay this time, who will pay the next time? Should my wife and I pay your debts so you can keep saying you were the victim? Mrs. Fuang burst into real tears. So now you want us to die, is that it? Kwok Hung stood up, his voice cold and clear. No one wants you dead, mother, but I won't let my wife live with the consequences of your actions. He looked around the room, at the fancy gift boxes still displayed in the cabinet, then delivered a final line that made Mrs. Fuang bow her head in shame. Then this is no longer just being deceived. This is a debt rope that you, mother, have nurtured yourself. I stood by his side, saying nothing more because everything was already crystal clear. Kai is a con artist, that's true. But if not for the greed, the vanity, and the habit of wanting to use other people's money to patch up one's own mistakes, he wouldn't have had so many cracks to slip into like that. That night when we left Mrs. Fuang's house, the sound of Chom crying still echoed behind us. But for the first time, I didn't feel the need to turn back. There are some pits that, if you've warned people about and they still choose to jump in, you can't spend your whole life acting as the rope to pull them out. The next morning, before the sun was even fully up, there was insistent pounding at Mrs. Fuang's door. I knew about it not because I was there from the start, but because Mrs. Fuang called Kwok Hung in a panic. As soon as the phone rang, he put it on speaker, and we immediately heard her gasping for air. "Hung, come to my house right now. People are flooding the house, they're demanding money from Chom." Kwok Hung and I looked at each other. The thing we had anticipated had finally arrived. The loans that Chom called temporary rotations couldn't stay quiet forever, especially now that Kai had disappeared, and the recording of his threats was like a spark igniting a pile of dry straw. When we arrived, there were several motorbikes parked in a mess in front of Mrs. Fuang's gate. In the living room, a few relatives filled the chairs, everyone's faces tense. The first to speak was an aunt named Luyen, who used to be very fond of praising Chom for being destined to marry a wealthy man. She slammed her handbag onto the table, her voice no longer as sweet as it usually was. "Mrs. Fuang, I haven't come here today to give you a hard time, but this money is money earned with blood and sweat." Chom asked to borrow 50 million, saying her future husband's family would transfer it back in a few weeks. Now the guy is gone, and she won't answer her phone. "So who is going to pay me back?" Another person chimed in. "I gave less, only 20 million. But that's little to you, while for me, it was my husband's medical money. I gave it because you said your future son-in-law was very wealthy. You said after the wedding, you'd pay back the principal and the favor." A third person turned beet red. "My family even transferred 30 million to Tram's account. She said she needed to put a deposit on the wedding venue. Now, where is the party? Where is the wedding? Or were we just foolish enough to pay for someone else's act?" Mrs. Fuang sat in the middle of the room, lips pressed tight, her hands trembling on her knees. At first, she still tried to keep her usual condescending tone. "I didn't take a single cent, they gave it to Tram themselves. Why are you all swarming here now? The girl is pregnant, you all should leave her alone." As soon as she said that, the whole room erupted in commotion. If it were before, people might still respect her, but when money is lost, pride means nothing. Mrs. Luyen let out a dry laugh, then opened her phone and held it out for everyone to see. "You say you aren't involved? This is the text message you sent me. Read it out loud." Mrs. Fuang turned pale. Kwok Hung took the phone, glanced at it, and placed it on the table. I could clearly see the words on the screen too. "Just help Tram out, dear. Later, her husband's family will pay back the principal and the favor. They are wealthy and won't let anyone lose out." The room went deathly silent. Mrs. Fuang froze, as if her throat were choked shut. Tram, hearing the noise inside the room, came out pale, hair uncombed, clutching her belly. The moment she saw the people demanding money, she burst into tears. "I beg you all, I'm pregnant, I can't handle the pressure." But this time, her tears no longer made anyone feel soft-hearted. An uncle looked straight at Tram and said, "Your belly is not a debt receipt. When you borrowed the money, you spoke with absolute certainty. When you posted photos at restaurants and in luxury cars, did you remember you were holding other people's money?" That sentence landed like a slap in the middle of the living room. Tram clutched her belly and stepped back, tears streaming down, but she couldn't argue. Mrs. Fuang intended to stand up for her daughter, but the eyes of those around her made her stop. Then everything became more and more unsightly. A young girl opened her phone and played back the videos Tram used to post. Sitting in luxury cars with soft music, holding wine glasses in restaurants, showing off handbags on glass tables, and Kai handing her a gift box. She said coldly, "We actually believed you because we thought you were going to marry into a rich family. Now, netizens have figured out that the car was rented by the hour, the bag was rented for photo shoots, and that gift box is just cheap merchandise sold all over the internet." Tram lunged to grab the phone, but Kwok Hung quickly stopped her. He said very softly but sternly, "Tram, don't make things any worse." She turned to look at him, her eyes bloodshot. "Are you taking their side too?" "I'm your brother." Kwok Hung replied, "I'm standing on the side of the truth. People are just asking for the money they lent out. No one is in the wrong here." Mrs. Fuang began to lose control at that moment. She cried as she said, "I was deceived too. My daughter and I are victims." But Mrs. Luyen immediately cut her off. "A victim who asks people for money? A victim who flaunts a wealthy future son-in-law to make people trust her? Mrs. Phuong, you might have been tricked by Kai, but you also dragged us into your charade of showing off. Mrs. Phuong bowed her head, for the first time having no words to defend herself. While everyone was arguing, Tram's phone kept buzzing. Someone was sending screenshots of her old posts that had been shared in private groups. Under the comments, people scrutinized every single detail. The car had previously appeared in a rental advertisement. The perfume bottle was exposed as a fake, and the restaurant in the photo offered hourly marriage proposal packages. The handbag still had a rental tag from a studio. The fancy world that Tram tried to build was torn to pieces in front of everyone, no longer holding any luster. I watched Tram collapse into the chair, covering her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking in waves. I felt no joy. I only saw that the price of a fake life is too expensive. When people use borrowed money to buy looks of admiration. When the truth is revealed, the price to pay is not just money, but trust, honor, and even the peace of those around them. In the end, the relatives demanded that Bao Phuong and Tram sign a debt acknowledgement, detailing every amount, every date, and every person. Ms. Phuong initially hesitated, but faced with messages, bank statements, and transfer videos, she could no longer deny it. Kwok Hung stood by and simply said, "Write it all out, debt is debt, don't claim you didn't know later on." Ms. Phuong looked at him, her eyes filled with both resentment and sorrow, but she still had to pick up the pen. As soon as the creditors left, Bao Phuong turned to Kwok Hung, her voice raspy, "You are my son, step up and pay for me first, save my face. We will settle up later." Kwok Hung looked at his mother, his face weary and cold. He gave a short reply that hit like a hammer on the floor. "If you took your pride out to show off, you fix it yourself. I won't pay for your bragging." Ms. Phuong was stunned into silence. Tram also looked up at him, tears still streaming down her face. I stood by my husband, realizing in that very moment that Tram's virtual facade had completely shattered. And when that shell broke, what lay behind it began to surface: debts and lies, greed, and a family far too accustomed to making others pay for their own mistakes. After the day the creditors arrived, Bao Phuong's house seemed covered in a cold, icy layer. The gift boxes she once cherished in the display case now lay silent, looking more like items of mockery the longer one stared. Tram's flashy shell was broken, but behind that shell lay another truth, darker, heavier, and far more painful. It was that Lam Kai had not only deceived Tram but had brought disaster upon many others. A few days later, Ms. Tui called me. Her voice was calmer than when she came to the house, but beneath it, there was an unmistakable exhaustion. She said she and several other women who had been deceived by Kai had filed a formal complaint. It wasn't just about romance. There were loan papers, bank transfers, investment promises, and even recordings of him claiming to be a project owner. Or a director of this or that company. Ms. Tui said, "I've endured enough, He took money from me and my daughter to play the part of a tycoon. Now I cannot let him continue to use other women's tears to make a living." I was struck silent as I listened. A wife who had endured until the end finally had to stand up, not just for herself, but for her young child and for the other women who could be deceived. I told Kwok Hung about it. He just nodded and spoke very softly. "It's time to let the law handle it. We won't interfere, but if the truth needs to be told, I will tell it." Not long after, Kai was summoned for questioning. At first, he was still very confident. According to Ms. Tui, he wore a crisp shirt and had his hair neatly slicked back as if meeting a business partner, constantly claiming it was just a personal relationship dispute and a civil loan matter. He thought a few smooth words and a faint smile would let him slide by as they had before, but this time it was different. There wasn't just one accuser, and each person held a piece of evidence that, when pieced together, formed a clear picture of deception. Ms. Tui had their marriage certificate and bank statements showing family funds being withdrawn. Another girl had messages of Kai promising to buy an apartment to trick her into lending him money. Someone else had a recording of him boasting about his banking connections, needing capital to rotate for a few weeks. The amounts were not that large individually, but when put together, they showed a repetitive scheme. Kai was detained for further investigation. The polished exterior that had once mesmerized Mrs. Phuong could finally no longer hide the cold, hard bank statements. Then Tram was also summoned for questioning because of related money transfers and messages. The day she received the summons, Mrs. Phuong cried as if the sky had fallen. She called Kwok Hung, her voice trembling, asking why they would summon her when she is pregnant. "Please put in a word for your sister," Mom said. Kwok Hung replied, sounding very tired. "Mom, They are just calling her to clarify things, not to harm her. If Tram is truly a victim, she should be even more willing to tell the truth. But telling the truth is never easy for those who are used to covering things up. The day Tram went in for questioning, Kwok Hung and I were also there at the family's request, mainly to prevent Mrs. Fuang from causing a scene. Chom sat in the waiting room, her face pale, hands clutching her stomach, muttering, "I didn't know anything, I was just deceived, I didn't know he had a wife." Bao Fuang sat beside her, stroking her back, repeating, "Just keep saying you didn't know, they'll have pity on you since you're pregnant." Hearing that, my heart turned cold. Even now, she still thought the pregnancy was a shield against every question, but real life doesn't run on such simple pity. When Tram was called in, she initially stuck to the script. She cried, saying she loved Kai sincerely, didn't know he had a family, and didn't know those funds were from fraud. She claimed she only transferred money to help her boyfriend out of blind trust. But Ms. Thai's side was better prepared than Tram had imagined. An investigator placed in front of Tram printed copies of messages a strange account had sent her months ago. The content was very clear. "Kai already has a wife and children, don't trust him. He is using his wife's money to scam others." That message had been sent to Tram's number and showed as read. Afterward, it was Tram herself who blocked that account. Tram stared at the printout, her face drained of all color. She stammered, "I thought someone was trying to sabotage me. I thought someone was jealous and making things up." The investigator asked back, "If you thought it was made up, why didn't you verify it? Why block them immediately after reading it?" Tram lowered her head, tears falling onto the back of her hands. I stood outside looking through the gap in the glass door, my heart feeling heavy. It turned out she didn't just not know. She had seen a door to the truth open, but she closed it herself for fear of losing her wealthy boyfriend. Then an even bigger shock came when Kai was brought in for confrontation. He no longer looked polished. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken, but his tongue was still as sharp as a knife. As soon as Tram saw him, she burst into tears. Quote, tell them you deceived me. Tell them I didn't know anything." Kai sneered, "You really didn't know anything? You read the warning messages, yet you still hugged me for photos, didn't you?" Tram trembled, her voice completely breaking. "You've ruined my life, and you can still say that? I am carrying your child." Kai looked down at her belly, his gaze icy cold. He dropped a comment that made the whole room freeze. "Whether it's my child or not is still uncertain." Tram stood frozen in shock. Mrs. Fuang, sitting in the hallway, jumped up as she heard it, her face deathly pale. Tram lunged toward him but was held back. She screamed, "You ruined my life and now you're denying the baby. You are a scumbag." Kai didn't avoid her gaze. He just gave a cold smile. "You didn't love me either. You just loved the label of being a tycoon's wife. I gave you that label, and you willingly played along with me. Now that the act is ruined, don't blame it all on me." That statement was vicious, but it struck Tram's deepest fear. She collapsed into a chair, her mouth opening, but unable to speak. I stood outside, my heart heavy as stone. I hate Kai. But I cannot deny that his words exposed a part of the truth. Tram was deceived, yes, but she had also willingly been blinded. She ignored warnings, ignored doubts, and even ignored her family's advice, just to be seen as a girl about to step into wealth. Mrs. Fuang sat in the hallway, her hands clutching her handbag tightly. For the first time, she wasn't fiercely defending her daughter. She just muttered, her voice bitter, "Who did I lose face for, good heavens?" I felt sad hearing that. Even at that moment, her first thought was still about losing face. Not about how the unborn baby would be, not about where her daughter went wrong, but about how she would look in the eyes of the world. That day, when we left the workplace, Tram walked behind us, her steps staggering like someone drained of all vitality. Kwok Hung said nothing, and I was silent too. Some truths, when exposed, don't bring a sense of satisfaction, they only make you feel cold. Because in this story, Kai is the worst, but what allowed the tragedy to grow was blindness. Vanity and greed had been nurtured for too long within my husband's own family. After that day, there was no turning back for anything. Kai was dealt with according to the regulations. Those he had swindled came forward one by one to provide documents and message logs. The facade of a successful businessman he built with rented cars, rented homes, fake gifts, and smooth promises finally collapsed, leaving not a single piece intact. But his arrest didn't mean Tram's debts disappeared. The people who had lent money to Tram still needed to get their money back, and the reputation that Mrs. Fuang used to cherish was as crumpled as a piece of paper crushed in one's hand. Since that day, Mrs. Fuang's house has always been shut tight. She no longer goes to the market early, no longer sits on the porch talking to neighbors, and definitely no longer boasts about her wealthy future son-in-law, but closed doors cannot keep out the gossip. People are still talking, still mentioning Tram's name, and still remembering how arrogant Mrs. Fuang used to be, and how she claimed her daughter was about to enter a wealthy family. The greatest pain for a prideful person is not becoming poor, but having their own boastful words come back to slap them in the face. Late one afternoon, while I was preparing dinner, my doorbell rang. Through the security camera, I saw Mrs. Fuang and Tram standing outside. This time, there were no suitcases, no arrogant attitude, and no appearance of coming to make demands like the first day. Mrs. Fuang was wearing old clothes, her hair was tied back hastily, her eyes were sunken, and Tram stood beside her mother, her belly clearly larger, her face pale and bare, her hands clasped in front of her. Seeing them at that moment, my heart couldn't help but sink, but that feeling was no longer the weakness I once felt. Kwok Hung went to open the door, and Mrs. Fuang burst into tears as soon as she stepped inside. She didn't sit down right away, but stood in the middle of the living room, her voice choking. "Hung, my Anne, I was wrong. I misjudged people, I was obsessed with pride, I didn't listen to you, but please save your sister, she still has a baby in her womb." The words, "I was wrong," were finally spoken, but they came after too many demands, too much blame, and too many times we were forced to shoulder their burdens. Tram also stepped forward. She had no makeup, no elaborate hairstyle, and no longer possessed the arrogant tone of the past. She looked at me, tears falling rapidly. Quote, "My Anne, please, I beg you to let me stay for a while. I promise I won't live in a fantasy anymore, and I won't demand anything else. I just need a quiet place to give birth." With that, she actually knelt down. Her knees hit the floor with a soft sound. But that sound made the air in the room heavy. Instinctively, I moved to help her up. After all, she was pregnant. No matter how angry I was, I didn't want to see a pregnant woman kneeling before me. But Kwok Hung gently held my wrist, pulling me a half step behind him. It wasn't that he stopped me from being kind. He knew all too well how his mother and sister had used those weak moments to trap us before. He looked at Tram, his voice deepening. "Get up. Don't kneel. Kneeling won't make things right." Tram looked up at him, still crying. Bao Fuang immediately interjected, "She has humbled herself this much, what more do you want? Your sister is wrong, I am wrong, but can't family give each other a way out?" Kwok Hung was silent for a few seconds, then pulled up a chair and sat down. He didn't evade, nor did he get angry. He stated clearly, point by point, that he would help within his capabilities. "First, I will find Tram a clean, safe place to stay near a clinic. Second, I will give you the number of a decent obstetrician for her checkups. Third, if needed, I can support with some essential items for the baby later on. But I'll say this now, no living together, number 15 million monthly allowance, no paying off debts, and absolutely no mixing our finances with the loans Tram has taken." Hearing that, the look of gratitude on Bao Fuang's face immediately faded by half. She wiped her tears, her voice starting to sharpen. "How is that any different from kicking your sister out? She is pregnant. You're leaving her to stay alone? Are you even her brother?" Kwok Hung looked at his mother, his gaze tired but unwavering. "I'm not kicking anyone out onto the street. I'm just not letting anyone into my home to keep destroying it." Tram burst into louder sobs. "Don't you love me anymore? I know I was wrong. I'm already suffering like this, and you're still keeping count." Kwok Hung turned to his sister, his voice slowing down, no longer cold but sad. "I love you, which is why I won't pay for you to keep making mistakes. If I let you stay here, if I provide for you as Mom wants, you'll just think that crying is all it takes to have someone carry your burden. You will never learn how to be responsible." Bao Fuang was shaking with anger, pulling out her familiar weapon. "We're blood, yet you speak like a stranger. I gave birth to you, raised you, and now that your sister is in trouble, you're setting conditions for her." Kwok Hung cut her off immediately, his voice quiet but firm. "Being family isn't an excuse to live off others for a lifetime. Mom, don't use the fact that you gave me life to force me to sacrifice my wife for someone else's mistakes." He left Bao Fuang stunned. Perhaps she never imagined that the son she used to boss around would dare to speak so bluntly. Kwok Hung stood up, went into his study, and returned with a piece of paper. He placed the address of a clean boarding house on the table. The landlord is an acquaintance of ours. The security is good. It's only a few streets away from the maternity clinic. Next to it is the doctor's phone number and a pre-written checkup schedule. He pushed the paper toward Tram. If you truly want to start over, this is where you begin. It's not fancy or pretty enough for social media, but it's clean, safe, and real. Tram looked at the paper, tears falling down. Bao Fuang stood nearby, her lips trembling, humiliated and furious. She couldn't find a word to argue back. Because this time we aren't being heartless. We are simply refusing to let them continue to take advantage of us. Kwok Hung opened the door, and the afternoon breeze rushed in, making the paper on the table flutter. He looked at his mother and sister one last time and said slowly, "If you want respect, stand up for yourself. Don't lie on the ground and expect others to kneel down to pick you up." That sentence made Bao Fuang hang her head low. Tram stood up, clutching her belly, no longer daring to look me in the eye. The mother and daughter walked out the door in silence, with no more accusations and no more threats. The gate closed. I stood by Kwok Hung for a long time, but my heart didn't feel completely light. Because seeing my husband's relatives reduced to that point, no one could be happy. But I knew it was the right decision. Some types of help lift people up, while other types only encourage them to stay down and expect others to carry their lives. And this time, my husband and I chose the first way, even though it was much more painful. After that day, Tram moved into the room that Kwok Hung helped her find. The small room only fit a bed, a folding table, and a plastic cabinet, but it was clean and had its own lock. The landlord was also a decent person. On the day she moved, Tram didn't bring as much as when she dragged her suitcase to our house. The sparkling dresses, photo-op handbags, and gift boxes she once cherished were sold off one by one. Some items found no buyers. Others were immediately identified as rentals or fakes the moment she posted them. Each time that happened, she would go silent for a long time. I heard from Kwok Hung that one day, Tram sat in the middle of her room, surrounded by items that had once helped her live in the eyes of others' admiration. Now they just lay there, cheap and meaningless. The bag she used to boast was a gift from her lover ended up selling for only a few $100,000. The perfume bottle she used to film in close-up online found no buyers because the scent was too harsh. I didn't laugh. I just find life to be very strange sometimes. There are things that once made people proud, but when you actually fall, you realize they are weightless. Mrs. Fuang also changed a lot. She no longer goes to the market with that hurried but high-headed gait like before. If she does go out, she returns quickly, speaking little and avoiding eye contact with anyone. Those who once heard her brag about her wealthy son-in-law now meet her with just a few vague questions that are enough to make her blush. Some relatives blame her for being fame-hungry, some blame Tram for being foolish, and others blame Kwok Hung for not supporting his sister. But this time, my husband didn't waver anymore. He clearly separated the finances between our household and my mother's home. Any support provided after that was limited and had a clear purpose. For prenatal checkups, he paid the clinic directly. For newborn supplies, I bought only the necessary items. No cash was handed over. We did not pay off Tram's debts for her. Not because we no longer cared, but because paying for her then would be like teaching her that she could make mistakes and someone would always be there to clean up after her. Time passed, and Tram gave birth to a baby girl, a tiny thing with reddish skin who cried very loudly. When Kwok Hung came home and told me about it, my heart softened. Children are not to blame for the wrong choices made by adults. I sent the girl a few newborn outfits, some diapers, formula, and a soft blanket, without any fanfare or unnecessary words. I only messaged Tram to say that if she needed anything else for the baby, she should ask, but everything had to be used for the child. Late one night, my phone lit up with a message from Tram. She wrote very briefly, "I have hated you for a long time, but now I finally understand that you were right back then." I read those lines over and over, feeling no sense of victory or triumph, just a bit of sadness, a bit of pity, and a sense of relief. Because at least after everything, she had started to see the truth with her own eyes. I didn't reply at length. I only texted back that if she understood, she should live a decent life for her child. For a long time after that, Tram didn't message me, but I heard she had started selling items online for a small shop, with a modest but steady income. She no longer posted glamorous photos or wrote cryptic messages. Occasionally, I see her post a photo of her baby's hand holding her finger, not flashy, but much more genuine. Bao Fuang also visited my house later on. She brought some fruit and sat in the living room for a long time before she could finally say that she had been too prideful in the past. I looked at her and did not hold any more grudges. There are apologies that arrive late, but they still deserve to be heard. It's just that there is now a distance between us that cannot return to the way it was. I still call her Mom and maintain my respect, but I no longer let her complaints make me feel indebted. As for Kwok Hung, after that incident, he became more reserved. He once told me that it took him many years to understand that loving his family doesn't mean letting them have whatever they want. I held his hand without replying because I knew he was hurting too. For someone to set boundaries with their own mother or their own sibling is never an easy thing to do. It's just that if certain boundaries aren't set, one day your own little home will be swept away. After everything, I don't consider myself a winner. I only kept what needed to be kept. The peace of our marriage, the kindness left in the family, and a clear line between helping and being taken advantage of. Family is truly precious, but it is not a place where those who are weaker have the right to make unreasonable demands, nor is it a place where one person must shoulder everyone else's mistakes just to be called reasonable. I am not telling this story to blame anyone to the very end. In life, everyone has moments of clarity and moments of losing their way. I only hope that when we love others, we don't forget to love ourselves. Kindness without boundaries can sometimes be used by others to bind you to the consequences of their actions. And peace, more often than not, doesn't lie in enduring a little more, but in having the courage to say this is enough.